Can you tell me something about your upbringing?
I was born down in Devon during the early stages of the war. My grandparents and my mum went down to Devon, and very fortunately after a few months acquired a tiny little cottage. There were a terrace of 3 cottages and we had one of them, and in February 41 I was born there, and over the next 4 years various members of our families were in the first cottage, and then we had um, acquired the rental of the second cottage. And it was only when I, very much later in life, I understood that the rental of this cottages, nobody knew who these little cottages belonged to, so they never paid any rent. And they were right behind the pub. They were attached to the pub.
Okay.
And they were right behind the pub. And we stayed there. My mum's mum and dad, and my father's mother for a time. And of course, during the war, all sorts of other men coming home on leave and all sorts of other situations. So they're absolutely heaving these little tiny, and they were the tiniest little cottages. 1 down and 2 up, sorry. And hardly had been used before for ages. Anyway, we lived there until a year after the war. And then my mother's sister, who was homeless in Manchester, but coming from London, she was offered a prefab which were put up just after the war in South London, where she came from. And she got this with her only son, Tony, and Mum went back to London with her sister. So that was my sister and myself and my mum. We went back to London, and by that time my father had deserted my mother and went off with someone else. Didn't come back from the RAF, and my aunt's husband went off on a government holiday and didn't come back. Well, he did come back, but maybe several years later. And we lived there up until I got married. The biggest influence on my life was the mission hall and the scouts, which were just round the corner in Down Lodge Hall and in Wandsworth. I did go to Sunday school at a strict Baptist Sunday school. We always used to go to Saturday morning pictures, and we were allowed to go to Saturday morning pictures on the understand that we went to Sunday school on Sunday afternoon. In other words, Mum and Aunt wanted to get rid of us, so we always went to Sunday school at strict Baptist. And one of the leading lights of the strict Baptist Sunday school was a good friend of mine. They were quite middle class and had a nice house not far away from ours. But I lost contact with them really when I got involved with the scouts and so on, and everything revolved until I got married with our scouts and all the efforts, all the activities of Down Lodge Hall, mainly scout. The 2 chaps who ran the scouts were wonderful Christian men. One was called Major Toon, and the other one was called Edwin Bird. He was been a fighter pilot in the Second World War, and they'd known each other from school days and run this wonderful scout troop, which was really based on Christian principles. We had a scout zone Sunday morning, church parades when we all went to the mission hall for the evening service. And when I was 11, I went to a church parade there, and the chap who ran the mission hall was a chap called Lindsay Glegg, who was a very well-known Christian leader in the country. Started the Filey camps and all sorts of other things. and was involved in Christian Endeavour nationally. And he was speaking one evening, and I remember going home, not at the church, but going home and making a commitment. But it didn't affect my life very much. I didn't really do very much. I did read my Bible spasmodically from then on. And I remember sitting outside on the floor of the prefab, outside the kitchen window, and my mum and aunt talking, and so my aunt saying to my mum, "Oh, he's reading the Bible," and one of them saying, "Oh, don't worry, he'll get over it."
So your family were not a Christian family?
There are no Christians in my family, although my gran always went to ladies' meetings at church. But that's it. Nobody else, as far as I know. But when you look back into ancestry, there were Christians in the family, but generation or so ago. And I did go to Billy Graham rally a couple of years later. I think that would have been when he went to Wembley at the end of the Haringey. I think he had a big meeting at 54.
Oh yeah, only a bit younger than that, weren't you? 1954.
I think it was 54. I went to the Billy Graham rally at Wembley and did go forward. But again, didn't make much of an impression on me. But then I remember one of the young women's talking outside the mission hall and saying, "Well, why don't you come to Sunday evening services? You don't come." And challenged me, so I thought, well, why not? So I did. And that began to have more of an impression on me, because we heard some of the best speakers and preachers in the whole of the country who used to be invited and go to down on shore. Very famous names in the day. And I began to think a bit more seriously, although my life wasn't particularly faithful to the Lord, and I didn't witness to others. I did get asked to speak at an open air after Sunday evening services in the summer. We used to go up to Putney Heath and have an outdoor service as a witness, and across from where we used to have the open airs, all the churches in Wandsworth, and it was the pub, the Green Man. And of course, I was about 15 then, and I stood up and gave my testimony, and which was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life, because all the boys sitting on outside the pub in the summer, where lots of them were from the school. All 15-year-olds used to drink in those days. In South London they did. Anyway, we continued to go there, and it was there that I met Sylvia Flower, student nurse, and where we used to have an evening, sort of games evening of badminton and table tennis. And at a chat session, there was a lovely lady who just used to make us drinks, and she was the best listener that you could ever have. Anyway, we always had a quiet time with those sessions. It wasn't just games, but it was very good. And we met there, and then after I met Sylv, my mates we all had motorbikes, and we went off in June 1961 to the continent, because one of my friends, there was 4 of us, one of them was a South African, and he wanted to see the whole of Europe in 5 minutes before he went home to South Africa after his training. And so we went on 3 motorbikes, 4 of us, and camped. We flew across from Kent, from Lyd Airport to Lutuke, in a little plane that opened up at the front and carried 3 cars and 3 motorbikes. The shakiest thing you've ever seen in your life. The whole of it shook. It was brilliant, and it went off and landed within about 5.5 minutes. It just went up and down because the 2 guys only need to cross the road. And anyway, yeah, we toured. We went through France, into Germany, and then down into Switzerland. And when we got down we were going down into Italy. And as we were going down into Italy, we had a very bad bike accident. And the 2 of us on the one bike, and my mate was his bike, and he was killed. And I was very badly injured. And a doctor who was held up in the traffic behind us, his father was one of the leading orthopaedic surgeons in the world and developed putting metal work in your leg. And he was in the hospital a few miles away from my accident. And so the chap in the queue of traffic, he came along, put my leg up on a bale of hay and gave me a jab, presumably a sedative painkiller. My mate was still alive when we got into the ambulance together, and he was taken down to the hospital, and he was operated on first. And I obviously was very ill as well. And several days later, I began to get better 2 or 3 days later, and they said I was very fortunate because there was a run by the Order of St Vincent de Paul, a group of Roman Catholics who the nuns wear these twin-peaked, and if you go to Victoria Street where Julian works, there's an order of the St Vincent de Paul in Victoria Street, and you can still see them wearing those twin stiff hats, headgear, not hats on. And they said I was very fortunate because when she went off on leave, the nun in Iran, she took medals for all the people who were really sick in the hospital down to Rome, where she went on her holiday, for the Pope to bless. And I never thought of it till afterwards, but she took one for my friend and one for me and the other really ill people in the hospital. He died, so he never got his medal, and she offered me this medal, and I was thinking, but I'm Protestante, nenti credit papa. And she snatched the medal back, and all the other I was in a room with 5 people, 4 other chaps, and they all thought I was the village idiot because they'd have given me good money for this Pope's medal. And I wished I'd have taken it anyway, but I was tried to be honest, and it was nice because
You never knew that he died, did you?
and even then I didn't know. I said, why don't they bring Alan into this room with me? Because all the foreigners were in the same room. German, an Italian, and 2 Germans, Italian, I can't remember the others, but I'm sure. But all the foreigners all went into this room. A beautiful room, beautiful hospital, and it overlooked Lake Missouri in Italy. So it was the border between Switzerland, and you could look down from my room onto this beautiful lake and the mountains. It was the most fabulous place. But anyway, I got a letter from my boss at work saying, I'm very sorry to hear of the death of your mate. And I remember my friends coming in to see me and being so angry, tears in my eyes, being misled. Of course, these poor chaps were going through a terrible time, having him cremated, and then organising his ashes to go back and
But they've been told
coming
not
up,
to tell you.
coming up, yeah. Oh, and I wasn't fit anyway. I didn't even was aware for a couple of days. I wasn't even with it. Anyway, about So I found out from my boss at work, and she'd written to me to tell me this. Apparently, in the evening news, there was a little section which said reported the accident and that 2 boys from South London were both killed on this bike. But I wasn't.
Right.
But I was put together
Praise
by
God.
Mr. Mollo, Molo, who, if you look him up, is one of the pioneers of orthopaedic surgery in modern times. Very famous. And anyway, I fell off in front, had the accident in front of his son, and he stuck us me back together again. And I mean, it's a perfect job because he assumed that I had a straight leg, and he put this leg back together with all its metalwork straight. And I was very bow-legged. So whenever anybody has bad smashed up leg, they get a shortening of the leg. But I haven't. I've got a lengthening because I've got one straight leg and one bow leg. Anyway, we came home for that. I was there for 3 months with my leg up in the air, and I regretted I didn't learn Italian because I could understand Italian perfectly after 3 months.
And you had a visitor in hospital, didn't you?
I had 2 visitors. The first one was a chap who stuck his head round the door with a real South London accent and said, "Who's your London boy then?" And me. And it was a very unusual thing in those days, a tourist. And they told him down in the town that I was up there and went up to see him. And then a few weeks later, my girlfriend arrived and spent a week very bravely, came across Europe all on her own, and managed to exist on things she could point at, very reasonably financed. You know, it wasn't expensive. Now it's probably one of the most expensive places you could stay on earth, on the edge of Lake Missouri. And stayed about 5 days, I think.
Yeah, I did.
And came in every day, and they said, "Who's she?" And I said, "Fidanzata," because I didn't know how to say girlfriend. So she became my fiance. And I got home in the September from the June, and then I was 21 in the February after that. And I think a lot of my friends, I remember one of the friends, she said to me, came to my 21st birthday and said, "Oh, we expected you to be engaged on your birthday," and I wasn't. A bit sort of thinking about it, and we got engaged and got married in the following September. So a year after I got back from Switzerland, we got married. And that's my upbringing, really, and the rest of it is all uphill.
So you said about you were when you went to see Billy Graham, you were thinking about making a decision, and you about giving your testimony. So can you explain what that means?
I think I did become a Christian very early on when I was 11, but I didn't understand the commitment one should make, because I come from an ill-disciplined family. I had no father figure. I mean, for example, in my life, I never did any homework until after I left school. I never did any work.
Right.
And I just did what I had to do in class, but never did any work because I didn't have any discipline, and my mum let me do anything.
Was that because of a lack of father figure, do you think?
No father. And my mum, I mean, when I had money, doing a paper round, I used to go to the pictures at 12 and 13. I'd go to pictures in the evening 2 or 3 nights a week.
Right.
I mean, who'd think of it doing it now?
No.
My mum would just let me do it. Did anything.
Yeah.
and I used to.
So what did you understand about Christian things when you became a Christian, would you say?
Very little. I mean, I thought very little about anything. So I thought very little about what the theology was and what my faith meant, and until much later in life. And I drifted like that through life, through work, through everything. I never thought seriously about my responsibilities as a husband and father until after Jonathan was born. I remember sitting on the bus going down to tell my mum and thinking, "You're dad. How did that happen?" And my life I was like that. There was no discipline in my life.
Except for the Scouts.
There was a moral discipline from the Scouts who were brilliant, but there was no discipline to work or think through things, and I never did. And that's been but you can see the pattern of God's intervention in your life so clearly of those not having a dad but having really strong moral characters in my life through the Scouts, and all through, and even in working life. I mean, another example is when I became chief executive of a trust. I thought, you're totally out of your depth, Robin, but God will help it. And so I started a prayer meeting, 8:30 Monday morning, and I had several people, two in particular, who joined me for prayer. My deputy and a woman, and a real solid Christian foundation for what I did, and I just put them there. I mean, that's very, very strange. Certainly not you. I know other chaps who are Christian, but they wouldn't have had that sort of support. But I needed it because I was so flimsy.
So what message would the Scout leaders have been giving you? They must have been, because they were Christians, weren't they?
They were absolutely devout Christians who dedicated their lives to the boys.
Yeah.
And they were so honest, it was unbelievable. I mean, one of them saying, a camp of boys said, "Stow the crows," and he got really told off because you're just substituting stone the crows for a swear word. And that's the sort of moral compass that they had. It was absolute. And then and another boy, when we were at one camp, he went down into the town, and like an idiot, because he was an idiot, he stole a little white Bible that brides carry. He would nick anything, and he nicked that. And the older boys found out.
Yeah.
And they didn't snitch on him to the Scoutmasters. The moral strength of that Scout troop was such that most of those boys were real good Christians.
Yeah.
Until the day they died, and some of them very strong Christians, and they marched him off the next morning down to the high street and made him give the Bible back, much to the embarrassment of the Smiths manager. But that's the sort of level of morality and Christian witness that those men instilled on us all. We used to have a Sunday morning Scout Zone service at 10 o'clock for 3/4 of an hour, and then the Scoutmasters usually go off to the Anglican church because they were Anglicans, but this was an evangelical missional, but they were always Anglicans, so they had it for 3/4 of an hour, and it was just a typical little service, a sermon, usually with a guest speaker, which was incredible to think of getting those speakers in for that, for a load of Scouts. And we all went, every one of us. And if you did 100 continuous Sunday mornings, you got a Bible, which most of us got. And you weren't allowed any lenience for missing a day. I mean, I don't know, kids at that age aren't ill, but even if you said, "Oh, I had a cold or something," that was it. You started your 100 again. One boy achieved 200, but only one. I mean, 4 years, over 4 years of continuous attendance without a miss is pretty strong. I did, and my cousin and most of the others did. And now, you think it was South London, and there were some real hard little evil boys there. I mean, a couple of the brothers become serious criminals, and one of the other boys, he at a Scout Sports Day, he was a thief and a villain, and he nicked all the vicar's pens which were in his jacket on the floor. And the vicar went and put his jacket back on, and he immediately said, "Oh, my pens are gone." And so the scoutmasters went, "Richard!" Frisked him, and he had all the pens. He turned up for the next scouts meeting, and they marched him out to the front, tore off his badges, and chucked him out. And 5 years later, I remember we were walking along. We used to go hikes. They never had any holidays from home. It was just scout camps and hikes. And we were on one of these hikes, and our scoutmaster, Major Toon, was hiking along with us. And he said, "For the last 4 years, I've wondered, because of course Richard then got worse and worse, and ended up in prison very, very quickly. He was vicious. I think the first time he went down, he attacked a police officer with a bike chain, and really serious stuff. And but it didn't start with him being chucked out of the Scouts, but it played on Major Toon's mind that might have been. Should he have done it? Shouldn't he have tried harder with him, kept him, worked with him?
I bet it was the first time he'd done something bad.
Well, of course, we all knew he did evil things all the time. He was vicious. He really was. He was so ill-disciplined that in South London at the time, they didn't discipline them. They put all the really badly behaved boys, probably autistic kids or whatever you'd call them now, into one school in Battersea. So he didn't go to the other school. He went to this hardline sort of Borstal type day school in Battersea. But anyway, so but what was amazing, that half of those scout troop became Christians and carried on, at least church attenders and highly moral, and a lot of them good Christians, and the other half drifted away at 14-ish when boys did, and never carried on.
The scout leaders gave you some quite exciting adventures, didn't they? I remember a story of them taking you on a boat or something. Was that as Scouts?
Oh, that was Cubs.
Was that Cubs?
The Cub leader, it was only about 8-9 years older than us. He wasn't 20.
Right.
And he led the Scouts, and he was a brilliant but eccentric guy. And we were down at Southend on one occasion, and Southend's just mud. And this tramp steamer was on the mud, and we walked across. He said, "We'll go across and we walked across the mud to this tramp steamer. He banged on it, and he said, "Come on, boys, come up and look at the bloke." Said, "Clear off." He said, "No, they ought to look at it, And this bloke said, "All right." They climb up this ladder, and we looked at it. I mean, it's nothing to look at. It was a real old tin. And another time, there was a submarine tied up on the embankment, and we were up there in London, and there was a naval guard on the gangplank. He said, "These boys want to come and see your submarine." He said, "It's not open to the public, mate." He said, "But these are all potential sailors." And he talked his way for us to go onto the submarine, and we went onto the submarine, and that was him. And then he said one of the most amazing things he did was he got called up for national service, and by then nobody got into the Navy. They all were just Army, some RAF. But he said, "I want to go in the Navy." So he went up to Admiralty House, and there was no guards on Admiralty House in those days, and he walked in, and walked along the corridor. Admiral banged on the door, went in to see this admiral and said, I've been called out for national service. I'd like to join the Navy because it's, you know, much the better place to be. And they chucked him out. He went back in and did it again. They chucked him out. He went in back and did it a third time. This admiral said, that's brilliant. We want people like you. And he did his national service in the Navy. And then he said, before I settle down, I'm going to go to every continent. And he went round the world working for the next couple of years and saw the world. And then he came back and he went to my school, which is a very ordinary school. And he went back, and the most difficult professional exam anybody will ever take is the Chartered Institute of Secretaries. And he took that exam, those exams, which means you're a chartered accountant and a legal advisor. CIS is really, really tough. I had a look at it for about 5 minutes. It's totally beyond me. Anyway, he did that in evening classes and became on the national board of the Chartered Institute of Secretaries. He became the Abbey National, I think it was Abbey National, Abbey National Chief Executive.
Oh, wow.
He left there and started the Anglian Building Society.
Oh,
And so he was a special character.
yeah.
But he was my cub master.
Wow.
And he wasn't even 20. When I
Wow.
He come back, his long-suffering girlfriend had waited for him all that time.
She waited all those years. Jackie, can't remember what her name was.
So what is your favourite verse?
I'd have to think about that a bit longer. I don't like the word favourite.
Or what's a verse that means a lot to you then?
I don't know, the basic verses, you know, like John 3:16 and so on, but there are so many others that means different things to you at different times. So I don't have a favourite, I have hundreds of favourites. I've got a sheet of paper at home where I've got 30 verses that are just written out that I like to look at.
Has the Lord ever let you down?
Well, there are things that I ask him for that I haven't been given, but I don't think that's letting down. I think that's just learning to be obedient and being patient. I mean, obviously, the main ones that I've prayed for over the years is family and particularly children following him, but that hasn't happened.
We
But
felt very blessed because I mean that surgeon being there when you needed him. But then it's also coloured by the fact that Alan never made it. I mean, he was there for Alan as well.
and Alan was a leading light in
He was a
Youth for
lovely-
Christ.
Wonderful Christian young man he was.
Yeah, he went in and did his national service, and because he made such a stand doing his basic training, they transferred him to be chaplain's clerk.
Wow.
Took him out of his barracks room and made him chaplain's clerk. Mostly because he was a very good athlete. We both belonged to Belgrave Harriers and he was good. And they virtually become a professional athlete and ran for the RAF.
Just before they went on that holiday, he came and spoke at our girls' Bible class on a Sunday afternoon, and he preached. I can remember to this day, preached on the verse, "Now unto him who is able to keep you from falling, to prevent you spotless." And I mean, he said 24 he was, and for a young man to come and preach in front of a load of girls.
We also went up to the Girls' Nurses Christian Fellowship.
Yeah, he did.
I went with him.
That was another thing that they did, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So can you tell me about times when you have become closer to the Lord? So
Yeah.
you said when you became a Christian, you didn't really know a lot about Christianity, really.
I mean, the period there where I started to think more was down in Kent at Athol, because we had such a great minister, pastor, and we didn't even know the church was in the village. We just went down to Kent. I took a job which I shouldn't have taken. It was a really awful job, and I should have stayed in London for my career, but God had a plan. And that was the church, which was 70 yards up the road from our house, and a minister who was absolutely amazing. And
What was the minister's name?
Harold Ashby, and he preached on the first Sunday morning, and that was the second end of the first week I was in my new job. And then I went to work on the Monday, and the head gardener came in, and the head gardener was in his overalls, and he said, I thought I'd introduce myself, and and if there's anything you feel you want me to do, obviously. And I said, you look so familiar, as though I know you. And he said, well, I preached to you on Sunday. He was not only the minister of 5 little chapels, the main chapel and 4 others, but he was also the head gardener, and worked. And of course, being such a wonderful Christian, and the worst, that's the wrong words, but the Christians professional Christians who do least I've ever met in my life are hospital chaplains, until I met prison chaplains. And Mr. Ashby came and saw me once and said, look, I often get called up to the wards by the ward sister to see patients who want Christian counselling. And he said, is that all right? I'll make up for it. And it's perfectly right. And he did that. He was special. And I used to go round to the little chapels with him on a regular basis and take part in the services for him, doing bits and pieces, little testimony or reading or something. And he was a very special man. He was ex-army Sazra reader.
Oh, right, okay.
And I've always had a lot of respect and support Sazra ever since. Because it's a unique organisation, because it's witnessing to young men between 17 and a half and 30, and that happens nowhere else other than prison.
Yeah.
And they really have a great witness. I wish that would develop more.
So how long were you in Athorn for?
Only 4 years.
4 years.
4
and it
years.
had such a big effect on you.
Yeah, and we've still go back there.
And you made such good friends there as well, didn't you?
Although most of them are dead. But it was wonderful. But the job was awful. I only lasted there 2 years, and because I came down on a sideways promotion. I didn't. It wasn't a development for career. I just wanted to get back. At Great Ormond Street, I was told by the boss, unless I joined the lodge, I wouldn't get promotion above admin grade. I was on the top admin grade there, and I wouldn't get the managerial grade in London teaching hospitals unless I joined the Masonic Lodge. And I wouldn't do that. So I thought I'd better get out. But I made, career-wise, a terrible mistake and came down here. And it was a mess. And I only lasted 2 years and then went to Sussex. We stayed in Kent while I was in Sussex, and then after 2 years there I finished my degree and moved on to the Isle of Wight as the number 2 on the Isle of Wight, and we moved from Kent to here. And I was thinking yesterday, We were at the service, I keep feeling like I want to apologise to Jonathan and Sylv because they loved it there. And what I could have done and should have done perhaps is go back to London and to work, but stay in Kent to live. But I never, my typical attitude of life, I never think things through very. But God still has a plan.
So you went to Sandown, and how long were you there for?
19 and a half years.
19 and a half years. And in that time you opened the home, didn't you?
Sylv did, yeah, and I supported her in that.
And that was an amazing work in itself, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was lovely, yeah. It wasn't easy and it was challenging, and we were talking about stress earlier on with Julian. And I remember when we opened, I was doing my job, which was quite a heavy job. It was number 2 on the island, and I was doing all the planning and development for the future, new hospital and all the rest of it. And we opened the residential home, and I did the finance side of it. Sylv did all the care work and so on. So any paperwork I was responsible for. And at least one night a week, I think, I slept in as night staff.
Yeah.
And I got to a period, I went to the GP and said, I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel like I'm working in glue in slow motion. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, so he knew about the business. And he said, you're crazy. You've got to get staff. You can't do, work at that level. It's impossible.
Were you fostering at that time? Because you fostered as well.
We finished
that before
fostering.
that?
Fostering finished when we took on the.
Right,
couldn't do
okay.
both of those.
No, that's okay. Because Nanny and Grandad lived with you for a while as well, didn't they?
And the little annex we had built in.
Yeah.
I don't think that were that your mum and dad there when you started Sharon.
Yeah.
Well, both of them.
Yes, yeah. Because we used to take Mum across there and give her a bath, didn't we? Don't you remember?
No. I don't remember taking her across for a bath.
No, I suppose you didn't, but we did because we didn't have to take her upstairs then.
Yeah. And the other period, and we had problems at the end of Sharon when it finished, and I remember being just falling on prayer and
We did really rely on the Lord for that, and that was miraculous how we.
because we had to finish, and
That was a very challenging time, wasn't
yeah,
it?
and it just sold. If we hadn't have, we'd have been in real trouble.
We would have been in real financial trouble if we hadn't have sold it. And my friend Linda as well, because she was a father, and she was just about old enough to retire,
Right.
and so it was important that we sold it so she could have some money, wasn't it?
And of course, another incident of really falling on the Lord's goodness and grace was when I got my cancer diagnosis. That's
And what year was that?
that was 3.5 years ago, October 2019, and that challenges you. There's a very charismatic, untypical for our fellowship, Italian chap in the congregation. I remember we were in the vestry with about the elders and him and me, and just chatting, and we were talking, and they knew about my diagnosis, and he said, we must pray for healing for Robin. But he put his hands on me, and the others did too, and they prayed for my healing. And I had it in my head that I prayed for 5 years of health. We'll see. Then it became clear that you just got to say and believe and know that you're in God's hands and His
Yeah.
time. And although I've got advanced cancer, it is creeping up a bit, but not to any significant level yet. And yeah, you will know when it is, I suppose. But you do, it does draw you closer to deepen your faith. And I remember
And the Lord provided for you in the hospital, didn't He, when you had COVID?
yeah, with
Oh yeah, when you
a staff nurse. I told you that the other day. Yeah. This woman was just seconded from another ward, never done it before in her life, and was not likely to do it again, according to her. And she was a Christian, and we had a nice time. I didn't have COVID because of my temperature. They just gave me a massive shot of antibiotics, and after a couple of days sent me home. But that was the only time she was there and to look after me. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. And my last question, or my next to last question, was, can you tell me about how God has helped you through your time living with cancer? Do you think that, so you said it's deepened your faith?
But it's also deepened my prayer life in terms of my family. And then, well, it's just another little miracle. My sisters rejected some time ago our discussions about faith. I'm no longer searching, because she went through a tough time when her husband left her. He became a Christian and left her.
He said he did.
Brilliant. Well, that's when he went to America.
Right.
And anyway, she wasn't searching anymore. She was for a bit. And she had good Christian friends at work. And then over the last few months we've seen this miracle of her and her son. They're not believers. But, you know, they're lovely people. It just widens the number of people you pray for. And I think in the last few years that's really been something on our hearts for our children and wider family, your family, and my cousins and Syl's cousins. There's so many people, aren't there, that, and friends in the village. We've got some lovely friends, Christian friends, and one of our Christian friends, her husband's got multiple sclerosis, been in a wheelchair for years and years, and we've seen him go from being on sticks to not being able to lift more than 2 or 3 fingers on one hand. She's a lovely Christian. She's looked after him totally. I mean, anybody else in that situation would have had carers. And if she asked tomorrow, she'd get carers because he's so disabled. But he sits on the fence, according to him, and he has not made a commitment. Now, and a chap across the road, who's a good friend, his wife died 3 years ago, and he's brought up in South London, near us, in a very wonderful Christian family. A dad who was a great Christian, and his brother and his brother's children. And he knows just as much about faith as we do, but he's not made that commitment. But he still goes to the little church in the village. There's so many people, and another couple who call themselves Christians and don't go to any fellowship whatsoever. And, you know, you see all the references about being involved with other believers, and they do it all online and all this rubbish, and that is nonsense. It's a cop out. And praying for them that they'll really, having grown up in the church fellowship that they were. But the number of church fellowships that you would want to recommend anybody to around us is pretty slim.
So if you were to give advice to young married couples, what advice would you give them?
Pray together, talk more together. The regrets of my life is that the decisions I've made on my own, just gone and done things. Like go down to Kent or whatever it is, and not talk as much through things. And that's what you have an obligation to do that. And failing to do that is a pretty big failure.
What advice would you give to your grandchildren?
Love the Lord and love your parents.
You've been to some quite exciting places in the world. What was your favourite place that you've been to?
I don't have a favourite place. My favourite place in the world is Somerset.
Yeah, you always used to say your garden.
But I love travel.
Yeah.
I don't suppose we do much more of it, but we've been very privileged that we've seen North America, the lakes of Canada and special. Switzerland is special, though we can't afford to be there. Far East, seeing Hong Kong, and we'd love to go in. We went round New Zealand with friends a few years ago, and that was special. And they're all lovely, beautiful places, in so many parts of the world. Lovely people.
Yeah.
You know, people who want to look after you in Africa are so nice. And New Zealand's a lovely place. It's gone a bit mad in the last few years. But yeah.
What's the worst place you've been?
Oh, we were talking the other day. You got friends at church from Colombia. The only place we really felt nervous about was Colombia. And that was
The violence.
They would regularly kidnapping tourists.
Yeah.
And all the Americans stopped going there at that time, but we, being British, the British cruise companies still went there. I shouldn't have done. It was obvious that it was dangerous. But there are some special places.
You weren't too fond of Mauritania.
Mauritania, it was a bit strange. A Muslim country which is very outwardly Islamic is so alien to me and us that it feels unpleasant.
Yeah.
And their attitude to life is so different from, we talked about our upbringing and, of course we lie and cheat and all the rest of it, but there is a basic moral code to our country as well as those who become Christians. And in Arab countries and Muslim countries there isn't. They'll lie and cheat at every level, and nobody bats an eyelid. We when we closed on the Isle of Wight, nationally closed all the nuclear bunkers that we'd put up after the war, Mrs. Thatcher very sensibly said this is nonsense, and we stopped equipping them. So I sent all the stuff that was usable out to Jonathan in Mauritania in containers.
Chairs and desks and
All
beds
sorts.
and things.
All sorts. I made the mistake of sending wheelchairs with wheels, which don't work very well in sand.
Yeah.
But anyway, but when it got there, we got it there, and the local round table or whatever they were helped us do it. And 2 shipping containers full of it, and half of the usable stuff was nicked as it arrived, which is typical, and nobody bats an eyelid. And one little trip we made in Mauritania, because the mayor, Jonathan said my father runs hospitals, so we went to the local hospital, which was for the local people, and it was you would probably close it if it was like a dog's home, because it was just concrete areas, and different spaces, surrounded by corrugated iron. And the local mayor, who was responsible for everything, took us there. And he said, he wouldn't come in. So we went in, and there was total, all the staff met us, which was one bloke, to the whole place. And all they did is put people there to die. And there weren't many of them. And one person, it was an Southern African woman was there, obviously a bit mentally ill. But, and that's typical of it. 6 miles down the road is the Iron Ore Company Hospital, which was a perfectly acceptable hospital, but that was run by the French who were running the Iron Ore Company. But, that says a lot about Africa. And Anne Harrow being there now in Africa, their system, whatever the system is, it's not working because there's nothing to do. So, it's people being sick, obviously as ill as everywhere else in the world, but there's nobody being cared for. And she's out there to do something. She's had 6 years of frantic hard work, and that's just stopped because she's just sitting on the roof of the hospital doing nothing. And they won't let her walk around either. That's another thing. They won't even let her go to the local shop or anything. They have to take her there.
Really?
Yeah.
So where is she?
Senegal.
Oh, right, okay.
Second city in Senegal is Silisi, something like that.
Where is she? I don't know.
She's which is, I think it's north of Dhaka.
Right.
Yeah.
So your children are now spread across the UK, aren't they?
Yeah. Surrey, Bristol. Yeah. So 2 of them are not far away. But Jonathan and Sean won't stay there. As soon as they have a couple of their children settled in, whether it's Manchester or wherever it is, they'll sell up and move there. They're really not happy in the house they've got now. It's just a good idea about being eco-friendly, but
yeah. Oh, well, thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. Yeah, go on.
I went to secondary school in London. They had a tiered system of grammar, central, secondary, technical, school of building, and I passed a grammar marginal, they called it, so you could either go to grammar or central school. And I went home and said, I'm going to go to grammar school, and my mum said, no, you're not, because I can't afford all the bits, uniform and extras. So I went to secondary school. Central school. And that was less rough than the secondary school, but it was still a South London school. And there was a boy who was in the Scouts, and I vaguely knew, who was at the school already, and he was very big for his age. And I immediately, when I got to school, for protection, latched on to Big Bill Button. His name was Hugh, but everyone called him Big Bill. He was 5'10" at 11, 12. But the odd thing about him is he never grew another inch. And when we left school, we were all bigger than him. And but he was a very powerful, strong boy, and a lovely Christian.
Gentle.
And I became his closest friend, and he became my mentor and guide. And he was 11, 12, 13, he was 30 or 40-year-old. I remember swearing something bloody or something once, and he just said, Robin, he was only about 13, 14. Don't you think that swearing is just a lack of self-control? And that was Hugh, and that was him. And He was my best man at our wedding, of course, and a wonderful chap. Brought up a Catholic, and he told his mum in his teens, I don't believe in the Catholic form of worship. I believe in... And he never went to Scouts Home with us, he always went to Catholic Mass. But he really thought through his Christian faith, and went to his mum and said, I no longer believe in Catholic, and his priest. And his mum and the priest said, we don't care what you believe, as long as you come to Mass every Sunday. So he said, I'll go to Mass because I promised you would. I tell you, because his mum was riddled with cancer. My sister nursed his mother, and when she came back years later, she did not believe us that Hugh's mum was still alive because she had so many different cancers. And she lived for years after Hugh died of cancer at 33. And he died within 2 months of getting a kick in the groin at rugby, and got a growth, and it turned out to be cancerous, and he was dead within weeks. But he was a politician, involved with the Liberal Party, and a wonderful man, and a very significant controlling influence in my teens.
He was a person that you would trust your life with.
If my life was in
He
danger, he would have got in between.
Well, he was. I mean, he was one of the two that looked after you.
On our motorbikes, he was one of the four of us.
The South African fell to pieces really after that.
My mate was South African. He was in front of us. Hugh was behind us on the bike, and I remember the South African bloke walking towards us, looking at the mess, and walking away, and Hughie holding my hand, while the old GP in the line-up put my leg, which was a Z, like that, and I thought, that's broke, and then I put it in a plaster cast. How am I going to get back on the motorbike? Not thinking that the motorbike's in 528 million pieces around me. But it's funny how shock does that to him. And Hugh was holding on as they lifted my leg up and stretched it out onto this bale of hay. If he hadn't had a doctor to do that, it would have been pretty dodgy. Anyway, he did. But Hughie was there for me then. I always had been. But he died at 33. The last thing he did was come to Great Ormond Street Ball. I said, "Did you come to the Great Ormond Street Ball with me? DJ?" He said, "I never want a DJ and I never wear another one, but I'll do it for you." And he came, and within less than 2 weeks he was dead.
He never told.
Never told his mum.
He never told another soul that he got cancer.
Were you
I
near him
told
when he
his mum.
died?
No, I was.
No, we was down in Cornwall, weren't we?
No,
On
I was on up in East Anglia with the Open University.
No, we were on holiday, all of us, because
We weren't at home. Beg to differ.
Because I was expecting Esther. We was on holiday, and I said to you, "I think you ought to phone Hugh." And you said, "I don't want to let him think I'm worrying about him." So you didn't. And when we got back, he was dead and buried, wasn't
He was dead and buried when we went back. Yeah.
he? Yeah, we were away for 3 weeks because we were staying with Pat down in Cornwall. He went to the university after that, just after that.
And we went to he had in his will that he would be buried as a Protestant, not as a Catholic. So we buried his ashes in the Kingston
His
Road.
mum, didn't we, and his sister. And they didn't know. We said we knew he was ill, but we didn't think he was that ill, imminently, because he came to the ball with us. And he looked so. But I tell you what he did that day. That day, he come and picked me up. I was 6 months pregnant, and he drove me up there because Robin was already up there at work. And he said to me, I wouldn't wear this outfit for anybody else but Robin. And on the way out there, we went past all these famous squares. And he said to me, I love those squares, he said. They're so beautiful, and the buildings around them are so beautiful. And I had this feeling that he was seeing them for the last time. It was really odd. I think that's why I wanted Robin to phone him up when he was away. But none of our friends, and they were all shocked, weren't they? Janet told me that he died. And then we said, oh, we knew he was ill. They said, well, nobody knew he was ill, not even his mum. And yet he spent the last few weeks settling her, putting her house in order, didn't he? Buying her different...
He just, all the money he had, he just bought white goods for his mum. Because he didn't think, wouldn't give her money. So he bought all these white goods.
Family, if he'd left her money.
Yeah.
It was really odd time.
And he was one of those people that God put in my way.
But there was lots of them in the Scouts. Like
There was some special blokes.
really adult, mature Christians when they were young.
In their teens, yeah. Roy Worrell.
Roy, Dave Stapleford was another one.
Yeah. Bill was for a time.
And they all died sort of early-ish, didn't they?
Well, Bill and Kingsley died in around 40. Hugh at 33.
Alan at 24.
Alan at 24, yeah.
And Roy was in his 60s and Dave was just about 70.
Well, Roy was ill for years and years with leukemia, wasn't he? And died in his early 60s.
That's when we was having all these reunions. But there was becoming more and more women in these reunions than the men, because the men, quite a few of them had died, haven't they?
Yeah.
No, we haven't got enough left to have a reunion. Nothing was left. So did Jenny and Clive and us two and perhaps Janet.
Jim would come.
And the other two, the younger ones,
Graham and Rosie. Yeah. But it's amazing, those two men are scout leaders and their witness. Absolutely incredible, the length and breadth that spread to.
It's amazing you're still in touch with all those people after all these years, you know, it's incredible.
So many people have said to us, oh, we couldn't have kept in touch with our friends because they all got divorced or, you know.
Yeah.
But there was one, out of all our friends, there was one couple that got divorced. She was so ashamed, she never let anybody know, she just withdrew into herself. I think Jenny and Clive did know, didn't they? But she said, don't tell anybody. And when we did find out, she'd been married 30 years, right? And when we did find out, she said, I was so ashamed. Because she was very self-sufficient, very intelligent woman. And she said, I didn't want people to know that I couldn't sustain a marriage. I was so ashamed of that. Wasn't she? I think she only came to our reunion once, but we've all kept in touch with her.
She's hard. In some ways she's very hard. She never really developed a relationship in a fellowship either, because she plays piano and she used to go and play for different things in prison and different things.
And then she used to say to us, oh, you always leave me behind, I'm the one playing the piano and you just go off. That wasn't true. I think that was just a...
She's very paranoid.